In the fall of 1975, Star Trek was a ghost that just flat out refused to fade.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Remember that in all of these videos, there's going to be a link in the description that you can go to where you will actually be taken to an affiliate link on Amazon showing you the availability of the books that I've been discussing.
The show had been off the air for 6 years, but reruns were gaining momentum, and fans were organizing, writing letters, swapping fanzines, flooding hotel ballrooms for the first true conventions. It was in this climate, rich with hope but haunted by cancellation, that Leonard Nimoy released a small memoir with a title that stopped every last one of us cold. I Am Not Spock. 5 words. Simple, direct, and for many fans, deeply unsettling. Without reading a page, rumors began to swirl. Nimoy had rejected the character. He didn't want to return. Was this the final death knell for the Vulcan that we love? Or was something else going on beneath the surface? Truth be told, Leonard Nimoy never set out to create a cultural icon. When he was cast as the Vulcan science officer on board the Enterprise, he approached the role like any other, with discipline, restraint, and emotional control. But Spock, well, he kind of became something more. The ears, the voice, the steady gaze, they all resonated with us. In a turbulent decade, he offered a kind of calm idealism. For many fans, especially those of us who felt like outsiders, Spock wasn't just relatable. He was aspirational. But for Nimoy, well, the role had come with a cost. Even off set, he could not escape it. People called him Spock in airports. Directors hesitated to cast him in non-science fiction roles. Reviews of his stage work always circled back to the Vulcan. By the early 1970s, the distinction between Leonard and Spock had blurred, and that is exactly what I Am Not Spock tried to address. By the time Star Trek entered syndication, Spock wasn't just a character. He was a symbol. Nimoy couldn't appear in public without being recognized. Even when he wasn't wearing the uniform, strangers approached him with questions, theories, and personal stories about how Spock had changed their lives. The level of connection was powerful. But to be honest, it was also just plain overwhelming. When Nimoy took on a stage role or gave a poetry reading, the questions always turned to Starfleet. Likewise, directors hesitated to cast him in parts that required raw emotion. Reviewers couldn't resist Vulcan puns no matter what it was he did. For Leonard, it was clear. The line between art and identity had blurred. I Am Not Spock wasn't a rejection. It was a boundary. A way to say, there's more to me than just the man with the ears. However, to a fandom still grieving cancellation, the message hit differently. Now let's face it, I Am Not Spock isn't a rant. It isn't bitter. It's actually thoughtful, at times even poetic, which should not surprise us. Nimoy walks readers through his early years in Boston, his struggles as a young actor in Hollywood, and the strange, growing realization that one role had eclipsed everything else he had ever done.
If you have any videos, photos, or documents that you would like to donate to us, please feel free to send them to jim@trek-world.com or submit them via the web at submit.trek-world.com.
The book includes short imagined conversations between Nimoy and Spock, creative reflections that revealed a man trying to understand his own duality. It sent a different message. To those of us who had thought to keep Star Trek alive, it felt like a door slamming shut, as if Spock himself had chosen to leave the bridge. The irony? Nimoy wasn't stepping away from Spock. He was trying to explain how deeply Spock had changed him and why that required space. Now, as the next few years rolled by in the late 1970s, the shock had faded, but the questions lingered. Could Leonard Nimoy really be separate from Spock? Or were they bound in ways that he hadn't even expected? The truth, revealed quietly in I Am Not Spock, was that Nimoy never disliked the role. In fact, he admired Spock's logic, his restraint, his moral compass. But he also felt suffocated by the world's inability to see the man behind the mask. But he wanted to find himself outside of Spock. Now, in time, we fans would come to understand that, but in 1975, it was just too soon. The show was gone, the future uncertain, and the title, Standing Alone on a Bookstore Shelf, felt like a loss. Yet even then, Leonard was preparing to return. Not just to the role, to something deeper. You see, in interviews about the time of the book's release, Nimoy was clear. He had not turned his back on Spock. He just wanted the freedom to speak in his own voice. But by then, the headlines had already outpaced the nuance. To the press, it was a juicy hook. To fans, it was confusing. Some warned, some argued. Others doubled down, vowing to defend Spock's legacy no matter what Nimoy said. But slowly, albeit quietly, something shifted. By the end of the decade, Star Trek the Motion Picture, of course, was in production. Nimoy was back in the ears, and not just for one film. He would go on to play Spock across 5 more movies, direct 2 of them, and eventually return in The Next Generation and Star Trek. The role he once tried to hold at arm's length had become something more, a collaboration of sorts. Published 20 years later after the first book, Nimoy published a second memoir. Care to imagine what the title? Yep, I Am Spock. It wasn't a reversal. It was a resolution. By the mid-1990s, Nimoy had lived enough years as both Spock and himself to finally speak from a place of peace. In this new book, he embraced the bond thoroughly. He wrote about how Spock had shaped his thinking, influenced his relationships, and offered a way to communicate values, logic, loyalty, restraint, that he had come to deeply admire. The titles, they weren't contradictions. They were simply a timeline. I Am Not Spock asked, am I allowed to be more than this character? I Am Spock answered, yes, and I choose to carry him with me. In the end, Nimoy wasn't trying to distance himself from Spock at all. He was trying to preserve what made the role meaningful. But also, he needed to preserve himself. That's the legacy of I Am Not Spock. Not controversy, not conflict, but a rare glimpse into the complexity of identity, especially when it is shared with millions. It taught us something we're still learning today. That it's okay to draw boundaries. It is okay to evolve. It is okay to love something, even if you need space from it. When Nimoy finally said, I am Spock, it wasn't surrender, it was acceptance. He didn't have to choose between the man and the role anymore. They had grown together, quietly, honestly, organically. Like he said, like all the best characters, he became more real over time. And through him, well, so did Spock. And I just wanted to thank you so much for visiting my channel to watch one of my videos. I hope you enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed making it. If you do enjoy this video, I would personally be very grateful if you might please consider subscribing to the channel. Why, you might ask? Well, Viewer subscriptions help to ensure that I am able to continue providing more Trek World content like the video you just watched.